Every January, a few million people open the same book at page 1 and promise themselves that this is the year they finally finish it. Genesis goes well. It is a story, a garden, a flood, a family that keeps lying to itself, a boy sold by his own brothers. Exodus goes well too. Plagues, a sea that opens, a mountain on fire, a whole nation walking out of Egypt in a single night. Then the building instructions start, and the second book ends, and somewhere in the first week of February, the reader turns one more page, and the sentences change. No escape now, no mountain. Instructions about fat and kidneys, and about which side of the altar the blood is thrown against. A bird killed over fresh water in a clay bowl, and a second bird dipped in its blood and then let go alive over open country. A house with a greenish patch spreading in the plaster, and a priest sent to look at the wall the way a doctor looks at a patient. A goat with a man's hands pressed down on its head, walking away alone into the desert and never coming back. And a father whose 2 grown sons are killed in front of him during his own ordination week, who then says nothing at all. This is where reading plans die. Not at the hard doctrine, and not at the genealogies. Here, 3 books in early February. The book is Leviticus. And the thing nobody tells the reader who quit is that it is not a heap of leftovers. It is one of the most deliberately arranged texts in the Hebrew Bible. It has a shape. It climbs, it turns at the top, it comes back down. So this is the map. What each block of it is for, where the whole thing hinges, and why the hinge is placed exactly where it is. And by the end, you will know why the verse about shellfish and the verse about loving your neighbor sit on nearly the same page. Start with the title, because the English one is misleading. Leviticus reaches us through Latin from a Greek word meaning, roughly, the Levite book, which is strange, because the Levites as a tribe are barely in it. They surface once, near the end, in a paragraph about property in their towns. The book is not addressed to them. It is addressed to Aaron's sons, and over again to all the congregation of Israel. The Hebrew title is just its first word, Vayikra, and he called. That is a far better description of what this book actually is, because it opens in the middle of a conversation. The Lord called Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. No preface, no scene setting. That tent had been finished in the last paragraph of Exodus. The glory filled it. Moses could not go inside, and we walked the whole structure in its own video. God is now living in the middle of the camp. Leviticus is the answer to the extremely practical question that this creates. How do ordinary people live next door to that, without destroying themselves and without driving him back out again? The book answers with 4 words, and it uses them constantly. Learn these 4, and almost every strange page becomes readable. Holy, not a mood, not a compliment, not a personality type. Holy means set apart for God, moved out of ordinary use into His. Clean, also not a mood. Clean does not mean washed, and it does not mean morally good. It means currently eligible to approach. Unclean is its opposite, and unclean is not a synonym for sinful. Burying your father makes you unclean. So does giving birth to a child. Those are duties, not offenses. Uncleanness is a temporary status that has to be resolved before you come near the tent, and then it lifts. Blood. The book states its own reason out loud. The life of the flesh is in the blood, and it was given on the altar to make atonement. And atonement, in the book's own usage, that is what a rite accomplishes. It purges, it covers, it clears the way back in. Now the map itself. 6 blocks, one after another, and every one of them has a different job to do. The opening block is the offerings. It is a manual, and it is written twice, once facing the worshiper, once facing the priest. The next block ordains the priesthood, and then kills 2 of its members on their first working day. Then a long block on clean and unclean, what may be eaten, what happens after childbirth, what to do about a stain on skin or on a wall. Then, standing alone in the middle, a single chapter that cleanses everything at once. Chapter 16. The Day of Atonement. Then, a second long block, usually called the Holiness Code, which drags the word holy out of the sanctuary and into the street. And then a short appendix about vows and valuations, sitting after a sentence that already sounded exactly like the end of the book. Here is why the middle chapter is the middle. Everything before it works case by case. A man notices a stain. A woman completes a birth. Something goes wrong. Somebody notices it, and there is a procedure. The whole system runs on people spotting their own problem and coming forward, which leaves an obvious hole in it. What about everything nobody spotted? The contamination that was never reported, the wrong that was never confessed. That is what the middle chapter is for. Once a year, the whole thing is cleansed at once, including everything that was missed. And after that chapter, the book changes subject. It stops asking how a person gets clean and starts asking how a cleansed people lives. Up, how to approach. The turn, everything cleared. Down, how to behave. That is the whole architecture of Leviticus in one line. Modern readers call that shape a chiasm, a text that climbs to a center and mirrors itself coming down. It is our word, though, not the book's. And the people who use it do not agree where the center falls. Some put it on the Day of Atonement. Others put it on chapter 19, where the command is to love your neighbor as yourself, which is a disagreement worth keeping. Because those 2 candidates are the same idea pointed in 2 different directions. One clears the ground, the other says what to build on it. So, the offerings. The opening block of the book is a catalog, and the catalog lists 5 distinct kinds of them. The burnt offering goes up whole. Nothing is held back, and nothing is eaten. The entire animal becomes smoke, and the text calls that smoke a pleasing aroma. The grain offering is flour, oil, and frankincense, the offering that costs a farmer his crop rather than his herd. No leaven in it, and no honey, but salt always. The text calls it the salt of the covenant with your God, and says it must never be missing. The peace offering is the only one that people eat. Part burns, part goes to the priest, and the rest of it is dinner, a meal eaten in the presence of God by the family that brought it. It is the closest thing in this book to a celebration. Then the purification offering. Older translations call it the sin offering, for contamination, and for wrongs done without meaning to do them. And the reparation offering, for when there is real damage to be paid back. You make the loss good, and then you add a 5th on top. Now notice something the reader who quit never reached. The purification offering has a sliding scale written directly into the law. Bring a lamb. If you cannot afford a lamb, bring 2 birds instead. If you cannot afford the birds, bring a handful of fine flour. Flour with no oil and no frankincense on it, because in that moment it stands in for a life. The poorest offering is accepted the same. Whatever else this system is, it is not a system in which being forgiven has a price that the poor cannot meet. Then the block restarts from the top. The same 5 offerings, in a slightly different order, told a second time. Now to the priests. The first telling says what you bring. The second says what the man and the linen does with it after you have let go of it. And inside that second telling sits one of the quiet, strange commands of the book. The fire on the altar must never be allowed to go out. That is not a metaphor. It is a duty roster. Somebody feeds that fire through every night, for as long as the camp exists. Which brings us to the men who did the feeding. The second block ordains them, and the ordination takes a week. Aaron and his sons are washed, dressed, and anointed. Then blood is placed on 3 specific points on each of them: the lobe of the right ear, the thumb of the right hand, the big toe of the right foot. What you hear, what you handle, where you go. The whole man is marked at the 3 edges where he meets the world. Then they stay at the entrance of the tent and do not step outside it, day and night, for 7 days. On the 8th day they finally work, and Aaron makes the offerings and comes down from the altar. He lifts his hands over the people to bless them. And fire comes out from before the Lord and consumes what is lying on the altar. And the people shout and fall on their faces. That is the high point of the first half of the book. It lasts less than a chapter, because the very next sentence is about 2 of Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, and the censers in their hands. They put fire in them and laid incense on the fire, and offered what the text calls unauthorized fire, which he had not commanded them. The book never explains what was wrong with it. It only says, twice over, that it was not the thing that had been asked for. And fire comes out from before the Lord again, the same clause, word for word, as the sentence just before it. The reader is meant to feel that. Moses gives Aaron 1 line about being treated as holy by those who come near, and glorified before all the people. And then 4 words, which are the most human thing in the whole book. And Aaron held his peace. He is given no speech and no explanation. He is given a funeral that he is not permitted to attend. Whatever you make of that chapter, notice where it is placed. Immediately after the priesthood begins, and immediately before the rules tighten. The 3rd block of the book is the one that everybody has heard a joke about, even if they have never read a line of it. Clean and unclean. It opens with animals. Land animals are sorted by 2 features that must appear together, the split hoof and the chewed cud. Water creatures are sorted by fins and scales. Anything living in water that lacks both is called detestable to you. That is the shellfish verse, and most people meet it already knowing the punchline, because it has one. Leviticus has a whole second life online as the proof text for the argument that the Bible is self-evidently absurd. Shellfish. 2 kinds of thread in 1 garment. Do not trim the edge of your beard. Quoted in a row, with a shrug at the end. It is a fair thing to notice. Those verses really are there, and read like that, in that order. They really do sound like that. So here is the honest answer, which is not a defense and is not a joke at anybody's expense. It is about genre and address. Leviticus is a covenant law code. Its own closing lines say so. These are the laws the Lord made with Israel at Sinai through Moses. It is the internal legislation of one people at one mountain, organized entirely around one sanctuary that has not stood for a very long time. It never presents itself as universal ethics for everybody everywhere. It says, repeatedly, that these things are what mark this particular people out, not as Egypt does, not as Canaan does. Separated, that is the book's own word, the way it separates clean animals from unclean ones. And there is a second half to the honest answer, and it cuts in the other direction. The 2 fabrics rule is in chapter 19. So is the command to leave the edge of your field unharvested, and to leave the fallen grapes for the poor and for the immigrant. So is paying a hired worker before nightfall. So is not cursing the deaf and not putting a stumbling block in front of the blind. So is love your neighbor as yourself. So is love the immigrant as yourself, because you were immigrants in the land of Egypt. Same chapter, nearly the same page. Anybody who quotes 1 line from it to end an argument still has to account for the others. And the categories themselves have a logic, once you stop reading them as hygiene and stop reading them as morality. They are not about germs. Nothing in the text mentions illness spreading, and unclean people are not treated as dangerous to be near. They are about access. Unclean means, for now, not eligible to come to the tent. Clean means eligible again. That is the whole axis. Chapter 12 handles childbirth. After a son, a mother is unclean for 7 days, the same as any other week of impurity. Then, a further 33 days of purification before she comes to the sanctuary, which makes 40 in all, counting from the birth. After a daughter, every one of those figures is exactly doubled. The text gives no reason, and readers have argued about it ever since. What the chapter does say is that she then brings a lamb, or, if she cannot afford one, 2 birds. The sliding scale again. Then 2 chapters on what English Bibles call leprosy, which is one of the most misleading translation habits we have inherited. The Hebrew word is zara'at, and it is not Hansen's disease. Scholars think it covers a handful of unrelated conditions of the skin, and the same word is used of a stain in a wool garment, and of a discolored patch spreading in the wall of a house. No infection behaves like that. This is a category, not a diagnosis, and the priest examining it is an inspector, not a physician, which does not make it painless. The affected person tears their clothes, lets their hair hang loose, covers the upper lip, and calls out, "unclean," and lives alone, outside the camp, for as long as it lasts. That is the human cost, and the text does not hide it anywhere. But there is a ceremony for coming back, and it is the strangest, beautiful thing in the middle of the book. 2 birds. One is killed over fresh water in a clay vessel. Cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop are bound together into a sprinkler. The living bird is dipped in the blood of the other, and then carried outside and released, and it goes up over open country. Someone who has lived alone for months watches a bird leave a priest's hands and keep going. That is the sign that they are home, which is a small rehearsal, staged for one person, of what the middle chapter of the book will do for everybody at once. Chapter 16 opens by naming the deaths of Aaron's sons. That is how it introduces itself, with the disaster it exists to prevent. Then it tells Aaron plainly that he may not walk inside the curtain whenever he chooses, or he will die there. Once a year, and only then. The date is fixed, the 10th day of the 7th month, kept as a permanent statute. He takes off the gold and the colors, and puts on plain linen. He goes in dressed like a servant, not like a prince. And he deals with himself first, a bull for his own household, before he is allowed to stand in for anybody else. Then 2 goats are brought and set at the entrance of the tent, and lots are cast over them. One lot reads, "For the Lord." The other reads a word that nobody has confidently translated in 2,000 years. Azazel. A place, a demon, a technical term for total removal. The guesses are all ancient, and none of them has ever won. The first goat becomes a purification offering, and its blood is carried inside and applied to the sanctuary furniture itself. The building is being cleansed. That is what most readers miss. The rite cleans the place, and not only the people in it. Then the second goat. Aaron lays both hands on its head, both, which is not what happens anywhere else in the book. One hand is the ordinary gesture of transfer. 2 hands, and a spoken confession over the animal of all their iniquities and all their sins. Then it is led away by a man appointed for the job, and turned loose in the wilderness, and it carries all of it off. Nothing burns, nothing is eaten. A living animal simply walks out of the story with the whole year on its head, and the camp watches it get smaller. Once in the year, the text says, for all their sins. The hole that the case-by-case system leaves open is closed right here. And on the far side of that day, the subject changes. Chapter 17 states the blood rule and then gives its own reason for it. The life of the flesh is in the blood. Blood belongs on the altar, given for atonement, which is why it does not belong in a meal. Then comes the Holiness Code, and it does something the first half never did. It takes the word holy and hands it to everyone. "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy," said not to the priests, but to all the congregation of Israel. And what holiness looks like, there is astonishingly ordinary. Honest wages paid on the day, not exploiting a person who cannot see you coming. Chapter 23 lays out the festival calendar, which is a whole subject of its own. We gave that calendar a video to itself. Chapter 24 tells the story of a blasphemer and closes with a line that is easy to skim past. One rule for the immigrant and the native alike. Then comes the chapter where this book gets genuinely radical. Every 7th year, the land itself is given a Sabbath and left unworked. Then you count 7 of those Sabbath years, 7 times 7, and you arrive at the number the chapter states out loud. 49. And the year after the 49th is the Jubilee. The trumpet goes out on the Day of Atonement, of all days, and the land resets. Sold land goes back to the family that lost it. People sold into service go home. Proclaim liberty throughout the land, the chapter says. That line is cast into the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, with the chapter and verse stamped in the metal beside it. Chapter 26 sets out what follows obedience and what follows refusal at length, and the second of those lists is very hard reading. And then it turns. Even after all of it, he says, "I will not utterly destroy them. I will remember my covenant, and I will remember the land." Then a sentence that sounds exactly like the end of a book. "These are the statutes and rules the Lord made with Israel at Sinai." And then there is another chapter. Vows, valuations, what it costs to buy back something you dedicated in a moment of feeling. It reads like an appendix because it is one. It gets a closing line of its own, and then the book really does stop. So go back to the reader who quit in February, somewhere around the fat and the kidneys, and hand them the floor plan. Nothing there was random. The offerings teach you how to come. The priests show you the cost of getting it wrong. The clean and the unclean draw the line you are crossing. The middle chapter carries across it everything you never even noticed. And the second half turns round and says, "Now go and be that, in a field, to a worker, to a stranger, to a deaf man, holy, clean, blood, atonement." 4 words holding up 27 chapters that were built rather than accumulated, and one shape running through all of them. Next February, when you reach it, you will not be reading a wall, you will be reading a floor plan.